Good morning. Just want to reiterate what I said in my prayer. Thank you for those that helped the last couple of days. I think I had the most people thank me yesterday that we've ever had at a giveaway, which when we had them all lined up getting ready to go and grab the stuff. And I told them sort of the reason why we do this is we just want to help how we can, and we hope they feel the love of Jesus through what we do. But I specifically said, I know times are tough. And if we can help just a little bit, I think it's worth it. And I don't know if they were believers. Probably a lot of them were not, but they amen that times are tough. And so thank you for your generosity, donating, volunteering, helping. You make a difference in our community, and I think our community appreciates that. And it's not always about getting appreciation from the community. It's about serving God. And I thank you for doing that. We're going to start a new series today called Christmas Unwrapped. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at different symbols and different things that come out at Christmas and what they could mean for us as believers, as followers of Jesus. And I think this idea came to me because, like, when we see a symbol, we know what it means. We know what that symbol indicates. So let's play a little game to get started. So if you know what that symbol indicates, just say it out loud. Randy's former employer. That probably makes you sick seeing that. How about that one? Nike, Real Phones. The best phone company right there. Not good phones. Driving test right here. If you failed this, someone probably would fail this. Way he drives. The greatest college basketball program in the country. Wi-Fi, battery, and then what non-iPhone users see on their phone. Right, Randy? What non-iPhone users see on their phone because it's always loading. It never reaches the point where, oh yeah, sure. Because you have multiple phones, so you can use different phones when they're waiting for it to load. Uh-huh. Those symbols, everyone pretty much knew what they meant, except for maybe this one. Randy should be used to this one, though, since he doesn't have an iPhone. Um, but those symbols, they serve a purpose for us who know what they mean. So if we're trying to connect to the Wi-Fi, we're going to look for make sure we have a Wi-Fi signal. If we want McDonald's, don't know why you would, but if you want McDonald's, you're going to look for the big M on Fast Food Boulevard there in Ashboro. Those symbols serve a purpose for us who know what they mean, but for those who don't know what the symbols mean, they serve no purpose. So what we're going to look at today is some common symbols that we see here at Christmas, some common things that we see at Christmas, and what they may mean for each and every one of us each Christmas season. And the first one today is simply going to be Christmas lights. It's one of those things that comes out around this time of year. You'll start to see some yards decorated like that. That's an actual picture of David Whitman's yard. Nah, I don't even know. Do you even put any Christmas lights out? Not that many. There you go. We have not gotten ours out yet, and ours will not. Ours will be a few lights thrown on some bushes, and that's going to be it. But last year, when Elijah was 2, he would call these colors. He wouldn't call them lights. He'd say, hey, look, colors. I want to go see colors. So we would drive around and go see colors because to a child, that is a bunch of different colors. But of course, we also put it on the Christmas tree. You might have colored lights on your Christmas tree. You might have white lights on your Christmas tree. Our Christmas tree does both. And Elijah knows where the button is to make them both flash. So thanks, Sarah, for that. There are Christmas lights everywhere. And so for us, we see those Christmas lights, and I'm like, okay, great. For Elijah, it's colors. For us, it's a Christmas tree lit up, lights up your living room a little bit more. But what's fascinating about these lights is that they come out in at one of the darkest and coldest times of the year. In fact, if you look up the reason why Christmas lights are a thing in the first place, that is why. It's because back before electricity, people would light candles, lanterns, and fires during the winter months to bring warmth, comfort, and brightness to an otherwise dark season. So Christmas lights began as a way to really make the season feel cheerful, alive, warm when the weather around us isn't. And what's interesting is the lights that come out in the darkest time of the year, it mirrors the exact time in which Jesus was born spiritually in the life of God's people, Israel. It was a cold and dark time, and they were needing the light that Jesus offered. In fact, Amos, he's a prophet, in Amos 8:11 through 12, he kind of prophesies about this time before Jesus would be born, and he says this: "The days are coming, declares the sovereign Lord, when I will send a famine through the land. It's not going to be a famine of food or a thirst for water, but a famine of hearing the words of the Lord. People will stagger from sea to sea, and they will wander from north to east, searching for the word of the Lord, but they will not find it." In other words, he was prophesying about this time in which God would be silent for the most part. They would not hear from the Lord. They would not have a prophetic voice necessarily. And that is the time in which Jesus was born. We call it the 400 years of silence. From Malachi, the last book of the Bible, to Matthew, the first book of the Bible, there is really no prophet that at least made its way into books made its way into the Bible. If you read about the history of God's people during that time frame, it's not good. They went through continued dominance by foreign nations. We just came out of a series on Daniel, and they were taken over by the Babylonians and then the Persians there towards the end. And that was the beginning of this continued dominance that they experienced by other countries. So the Greeks will come in after that. The Romans would come in after that. And the Romans would rule with just this heavy rule, harsh rule. And that was the time in which Jesus was born. One of the Greek rulers that we will probably cover when we do the second part of our Daniel series, he tried wiping out God's people during this time frame. And so he's a type or a preview of what the Antichrist will be like. And so for God's people, when Jesus is born, it's dark, it's cold, it's bad, kind of like the weather around this time of the year. But that is when the light, that is Jesus, appears. We're going to be in Isaiah chapter 9 today. Is where we're going to be going through a prophecy that covers Christmas. And just to give you some context of when Isaiah is prophesying, I got this handy timeline I found online. So we have God's people, northern and southern kingdoms, they split after Solomon dies. And Isaiah is prophesying about here. So about the time that Israel falls and Judah is alone. We were just in Daniel, which is after Isaiah, and then you'll see all the way over here to Malachi was the last one to really prophesy before we went through the 400 years of silence. But Isaiah, the prophecy we're going to be reading today, is actually right before Israel falls. He is prophesying about this fall that is about to take place. And so in Isaiah chapter 8, we need to read there just to kind of get some idea of what's going on. At this point, Israel, which is the northern kingdom, is about to be taken over by Assyria. Assyria is right at the borders, getting ready to invade. The northern kingdom's getting ready to fall. And God's going to allow that to happen because God's angry. God is frustrated with Israel's lack of faithfulness to him. And so Isaiah prophesies this in Isaiah chapter 8, verse 4. He's referring to a boy, and this is his son that was just born. He says, for before the boy knows how to say my father or my mother, so before the baby will talk, so this is going to happen in a very short time frame, the wealth of Damascus and the plunder of Samaria will be carried off by the king of Assyria. So in other words, the northern kingdom is about to fall. And then we pick up in Isaiah chapter 9. And Isaiah chapter 9 is a flip because all of a sudden he's trying to be encouraging. He's giving them encouraging prophecy, encouraging message for God's people. He just told them in Isaiah 8, hey, you're going to fall. The Assyria is going to take over. Nevertheless, in verse 1, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. So he's referring to these two most northern tribes, and here's sort of a picture. Nope, not that picture. I must not have the picture up there. Randy's favorite picture right there. The two most northern tribes, Zebulun and Naphtali, they are on the north side of Israel. And in other words, Assyria is invading from the north side, and they are the tribes that are surrounding the Sea of Galilee. And so what's saying is in the past, he's humbled that region. That region is the region in which they got first taken over. But he's pointing to a time in the future when God will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea and the Jordan. In other words, what he is referring to is the ministry that Jesus would have in that very area. The first place that got taken over is the first place that's really going to see the Savior doing his ministry. So he's going to honor that same area. Now, of course, they could assume that maybe, but they didn't know for sure. But then there's this verse in verse 2 that really communicates to them that things are going to change. He says, the people walking in darkness, they have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. So from verse 1 to verse 2, we skip to talking about what happened around 732 BC when those northern tribes are taken over to talking about what was going to happen around 750 years later. And he describes that time as people walking in darkness and the land as in deep darkness. And what's going to happen is a light has dawned. A light has come. And that light represents that hope that things are going to get better. So then Isaiah, all of a sudden in verses 3 through 5, before he kind of goes into detail about what is this light? Why is there going to be a light? He goes into how excited the nation's going to be at that point. He says in verse 3, says, you, talking about God, have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoicing when dividing the plunder. So he's saying the nation is rejoicing as they do when they bring the harvest in, when you're getting your food in, when you're bringing everything, or when warriors have won the battle and they're dividing up everything that they got. The nation's going to be rejoicing like that. Verse 4, for as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressors. So he's referring to Gideon's victory at Midian, and it's basically saying, hey, those oppressors that have been over you during this entire time, that chain is going to be broken. You're going to be set free. And verse 5 says, every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. Why? Why are they burning the warrior's boots and the garments? Because there's going to be no need for war. It's going to be a time of peace. And so I was God's people. Hearing Isaiah prophesy this, I'd be like, okay, I cannot wait for that time because it's going to be a great time in the life of God's people. He then explains why things are going to change starting here in verse 6. And this is probably familiar to you around Christmas season. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and the Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. So he's told them about this time in which they'll no longer be under their oppressors. They won't have a need for warriors to be ready to go in the battle. It's going to be a great time, and here's why. Because a child has been born. More than a child, this child is going to be a child king. He is going to reign on David's throne. He's going to be someone from the line of King David. And for the Jewish listeners at that time, that would have took them back to Israel's glory days when David was united the kingdom and they were working together and worshiping God together. So they're like, okay, this child's going to be born. This child's going to be a wonderful counselor, which means he's going to be very wise. He's described as mighty God, which communicates he's going to be powerful. He's even described as the everlasting Father, which is communicating that he's divine. And he's going to be this Prince of Peace, who is a peacemaker. He will reign forever. This kingdom will have no end. I would be excited to hear that. Now, we look at that today and say, Jesus is that. But for them, listening to this prophecy, what would your expectation be? Your expectation would be that this boy would be born. He would probably be honored from the get-go, but eventually he would rise to power. He would be a political individual. He'd be very powerful. He would crush the Romans. He would be a revolutionary. He would be someone that would finally bring peace to the Middle East, and we're still searching for that today. I would think that they would feel some hope for this child, similar to the hope that we feel maybe when new presidents are elected. You've already seen that. This is the picture that I had in my head was in 2008. I think it was 2008. Obama ran on hope during the financial crisis. Things were not good. He ran on hope for today. People in 2016 and in 2024 voted for Make America Great Again. That provides hope that things will get better. Now, I hope for you understand that no president can give hope. Presidents are going to fail. They're never going to fulfill that. Only Jesus can. But the hope that a lot of people feel when their favorite politician wins is probably the hope that they felt when they heard Isaiah's prophecy about this Messiah, about this Jesus that would be born. Of course, they didn't know it was Jesus. They would hold on to that hope for generations. And ultimately, I think they especially held on to that hope during those 400 years. We look back now and we know Jesus' fulfillment of this prophecy. In fact, Matthew in his gospel, he is specifically writing to the Jews. He says in Matthew 4:13 through 17, says that Jesus was leaving Nazareth and he went and lived in Capernaum, which was by the lake in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali, to fulfill what was said to the prophet Isaiah. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people living in darkness have seen a great light. And those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. And from that time on, Jesus began to preach, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. So in other words, Matthew is saying Jesus is the fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 9. Jesus is that son that was born. Jesus is that baby king that would come and reign. And he's the fulfillment of that because his ministry started right there in the place that Isaiah prophesied God would honor that area. And so we look back today and we can tell Jesus fits every description in Isaiah chapter 9. And it looks like the people living in darkness in that time would have seen that and would have clung to the hope that Jesus offered. It looks like for people living in darkness, they would have been looking for the light wherever they could find it. But something I've learned is that when darkness is so overwhelming, sometimes you miss the light. And the darkness was overwhelming for God's people at that time. And unfortunately, many of them missed the light that was Jesus. So I've learned that darkness has a way of distorting our perspective. And think about if you're walking in the middle of night or a dark room, you can't really see what you're doing. You can walk, you can head in the same direction, but you don't really know what you're doing. At least in my head, when things get dark up here, it distorts my perspective on things. Things seem worse than they really are. There's times where I feel like I'm drowning in the hole of darkness. That's the best way to describe it. And we don't see any good news for what it really is. You've probably experienced that, or you probably have tried encouraging someone who is experiencing that. You're telling them something good, and they just can't see it or hear it. I've been in such dark seasons in my life before where even when there was glimmers of hope, I didn't trust them to be hope. I didn't trust them to be anything good because the devil had beat me down so bad that I didn't think any good could come into my life. And I think that's really a picture of what deep depression looks like. When we get really down, when we get really depressed, it's hard to get out of that situation. It's hard to see light for what it is. And let's face it, there's a lot of people dealing with that or something like that right now. Holidays are a tough time for people who have lost loved ones in recent years and who are still working through the darkness of the grieving process. Not to mention, as I said yesterday before we let everybody start shopping for stuff, I said times are tough financially. And they said amen. I mean, some people don't know where their next meal is going to come from. We had some people at the end of the event yesterday take coats to some homeless people who have been out on the streets these last few really cold days. People are wondering how they're going to afford groceries the next month. There's a lot of people who are just fearful of what the future is going to hold for them or their family due to different things maybe going on in their life. We have a lot of people who are walking in darkness. And when the darkness gets a stronghold in our mind, it's hard to break out. It just causes really a general gloominess over us. And, we talk about seasonal depression. When winter comes around, often that darkness gets worse. I told Sarah on the way down here, I said, we're in for some gloomy days the next few days. It's going to be a lot of rain, a lot of clouds, already dark, already ready to go to bed at 7 o'clock. It's going to get worse than that. You're going to be ready to go to bed at 11 a.m. And so my question for us today, this might be you. You might be walking in darkness. You might know someone walking in darkness. My question for us is, how do we deal with that darkness in our minds? Unfortunately, today, we often try to numb it. That's why there's so many bars. That's why there's so many places you can go and try to numb away the pain, the darkness that you may be feeling. The other thing we try to do, though, is we ignore it. We turn on the TV, we get on our video games, we doom scroll on Facebook or TikTok or whatever it is, and we're just trying to ignore the darkness that is in our life. And then, at least in my life, what I've recognized is that when I get away from the noise and get into the quiet, the darkness comes rushing in. Why? Because I've been ignoring it all day. Some people even ignore it in work. You just get in and focus on work and then try to forget everything that's wrong in your life. And then sometimes I think we just try to power through it. And out of the three, that's probably the best one, but we'll talk about why that's not the best one. Sometimes you just cannot power through the darkness yourself. You need light to overcome the darkness. And so what darkness really should do, we should not just numb it, we should not just ignore it, we should not just power through it. When we are experiencing darkness in our life, it should remind us that we need someone or something bigger than us. The opposite of darkness is light. So that darkness should remind us that we need light. And guess what? You don't have the power in yourself to produce light. You don't have the power in yourself to produce light. No matter how hard you try, no matter how much self-help talk you do, no matter how many motivational speeches you watch, no matter how many YouTube videos you listen to, you can try to pull yourself out of the darkness. But sometimes that darkness is just so overwhelming that there's no hope for you to be able to get yourself out of it. When we try to produce light from within ourselves, we will fail. And so darkness should be something that reminds us to look to someone or something more powerful. And spoiler alert, Jesus is that person. Jesus is the light of the world. Here's what John 8:12 says. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Here's what John said in the first chapter, first few verses of his gospel. He says, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I wonder if John was thinking about Isaiah chapter 9 there when he said that a light has shined in the darkness, a light has dawned. And he is saying, John's writing after Jesus has come and gone, and he says, guess what? The darkness still hasn't overcome it, and the darkness will not overcome it. And we can hold to that truth. John also equates there in verse 4, life and light together. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. We can't give life ourselves. You can't make yourself. If we could make life ourselves, we probably would not want to die. Instead, only God can be the one that gives life. And therefore, God is the only one that can bring light. And so he is that light that overcomes our darkness. In fact, he is the only one that truly can. Everything else we do is only a temporary fix. You can numb it with alcohol, and you're going to wake up the next morning with a hangover, and the darkness is going to be worse. You can numb it with drugs, but guess what? You're risking your life. You can try to ignore it, but like I said, when you get in the quiet seasons in your life, guess what comes rushing in? The darkness. You can try to power through it, but that often just makes it worse. Or you could seek the light. And that's my first point for you, is seek the light. You could seek the one who is the light. You could seek Jesus. He is that light that cannot be extinguished. He is that light that is always there, always shining, and he just wants you to get close to him. You know, going back to the whole reason why we have lights at Christmas time is for warmth, to overcome the darkness, because the times get darker earlier. What good is that light if you light it and then you go over in the darkness? It's no good. You need to actually go towards the light in order for the light to be beneficial to you at all. And so Jesus, my point here is that Jesus is always shining. The question is, are you getting close to the light? We should be seeking the light like bugs seek the light. I was going to use that as the analogy, and I looked up, why do bugs seek the light, and my analogy fell apart, because bugs seek the light basically because they're dumb. And the light disorients them, and they don't know what they're doing. I had a whole analogy lined up about how they're seeking it for warmth, they're seeking it for, we should fly right into it like they do, but no, it's just because they're dumb. They get so disoriented because of the light. So that analogy fell apart. I guess I could say you cannot be dumb by seeking the light of Jesus. It'd be dumb to go away from the light. We have to seek, though, like this picture in my head is those bugs flying towards the light. If there's light, they're going to find it at night, and especially in the cold. Well, we need to do the same thing. We need to try to find Jesus. We need to seek that light wherever we can. And I think deep down our hearts naturally seek that light, but we spend so much time numbing and ignoring and powering through that we don't listen to our heart's desire to search for someone greater than us. And so that's something that we have to be aware of in our hearts and our minds, that we need to be the ones seeking the light. And the reason why is because Jesus is the only one that gives the promise in Scripture that he can work all things around for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. The darkest season you've ever been through, and I don't know what season just came into your head, he can turn it around for the good. That is why it's so important for you to seek him. If you try to handle it, you're going to make a bigger mess. But if you let him handle it, the promise is that somehow he will work it around for the good. And it's important that we trust him to do this because he knows what we really need. We only know what we want. He knows what we need. And so sometimes what we want is not what we need, and sometimes what we don't want is what we need. He knows what we need. So we have to seek the light who desires good for us, who knows truly what we need. And not only that, he can keep the darkness away. In fact, John 8:12 says this, I am the light of the world, and he says whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. You might walk through dark seasons, but who's walking through that dark season with you? Jesus. It says you will have the light of life. In other words, the dark seasons are going to come, but the light will be there with you if you follow Jesus, if you seek the light, if you go after the light. So every time you see Christmas lights this Christmas season and every Christmas season, I first want it to point you and remind you to seek the one who is the light. Second thing I really want to communicate here is that light represents hope. That light represents hope that things will get better. And we have so many sayings and so many things actually that communicates this in the world. First saying that we do is, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, which means that there's hope that things are going to get better. There's hope that we'll make it out of the darkness. There's hope that this darkness is not all there is. Throughout history, light has represented hope. The first example would be the Statue of Liberty. The lantern at the top represented hope that things would get better. One a little bit closer to home, Cape Hatteras, and really any lighthouse. It told them, number one, where the land was so they didn't crash into it. But number two, if they did crash and their boat is sinking, it provides hope that land is close because there's a lighthouse shining. Third example, and I've always heard this, but apparently it might not be true. Lanterns on the Underground Railroad would represent hope for freedom. And then when I read this morning, it said that only one person did that, but we've made it this whole thing that they would put lanterns in every house. But one example I do want to do is this is from, I don't know, it was in recent years, in the last 15 years, 16 years. There was some miners in Chile who were in a cave for 69 days and needed to be rescued. And they said that one of the most memorable and impactful moments was when they broke through the mine and they saw light. Light broke through and they knew they would be rescued. And it made me think we are very much like them. We were caught in a cave. We were caught in darkness. God's people were caught in darkness. And the light came. The light broke through. Some of them missed it. Hopefully you're not one of them, because that light is still shining. And so we need to seek that light, because that light provides hope that this darkness is not all there is. So when you see lights this Christmas, I want that to remind you that there is hope. The third thing, and I was just going to do 2 points, but I wanted to include the hope thing. I want you to seek the light, and I want you to be the light. And not just me. I want you to do that, of course, but God wants you to do that. In fact, here's what Jesus says. He first said, I am the light. And then in Matthew 5:14, he says, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. And what happens is when you seek the light, Jesus, he makes you a light, specifically of hope for others. That this isn't all there is, that there is things that can be better. He will transform us to shine ourselves in a world that desperately, desperately needs it. There's a lot of people walking in darkness. There's a lot of people who are going through tough times. Yesterday, I heard multiple stories of people. One lady told me, which I was going to announce this later, but if anybody has a kerosene heater, she could use a kerosene heater. Because what's happening right now is she's turning her heat on in her house, and I guess it's taking so much power, it's flipping everything off. And so she said, I need some way to heat. She didn't ask for us to go and fix her electrical problem. She just said, if anyone has a kerosene heater, I could use it. And I said, well, I'll check. So if you have a kerosene heater, talk to me after service, and we'll see if we can get it to her. I could tell some of those yesterday needed coats. I mean, their coats were old or raggedy, and coats can be expensive, and we were able to meet that need. We gave them a hot meal. Like, people are in tough times right now. You can see it when you go to the grocery store. Groceries are expensive. When you get your power bill, power is expensive, especially if your house is like the house that we looked on there. That's why we don't have a lot of Christmas lights, because I'm a saver. But you look at the cost of living is going up. Things are getting more expensive. People are wondering where their next paycheck is going to come from even. You know, things are tough. And so we can be that light that walks in this darkness to provide people with a little hope. I was at Food Line the other day shopping, and I picked the worst line to be in, you know, because it took forever. But I was glad I did, because God taught me something in that. And it gave me a sermon illustration, really. The cashier was just excellent. It was two older women and I guess their daughter and granddaughter. And they were having problems, and apparently someone said something to the woman in the store, and she was all upset about it. And this young cashier did an excellent job calming her down, handling the situation, being very patient with them, working with them. And I told him that afterwards. I said, I used to work at Food Line. I used to be an office assistant. And I said, and you are excellent. And he said, well, I just started like a week ago. But I said, well, then you are going to be very good. I said, you have every customer service skill that you could search for. And I don't remember how we got on the topic, but I, of course, figured out he was a Christian, because it was just, you could just see it. And I told him I was a pastor, and we talked, and he said, you never know what someone's going through, and you can just brighten their day just by being nice. And I said, you're exactly right. I mean, he was telling this woman, we can't let what someone else does to us bother us, because God has so much more purpose for us in life. And I'm just like, whoa, this is a young man who is wise beyond his years and is just a beacon of light in Food Line. And I was thinking, we can make that impact too, wherever we're at. In our workplace, in our homes, in the store. I hope I provided a little hope and encouragement to him by telling him what a great encouragement he was to them. I want to honor that, and I did. And so for us, we need to be a people during this Christmas season that spreads hope wide and close. Wide in that we be someone that lights up the room when we walk in. That we are this light of hope for people, that there is more than what this darkness is in this world. But also when I say close, There are some people in your life, I guarantee it, that are in a dark season that needs you to target them and to encourage them, to help them, to be a helping hand, to provide a little light and hope in the midst of that darkness. Um, you're probably thinking of who that might be. And I encourage you to do something for them during this Christmas season. I encourage you to spread hope wide. Do things like, pay for someone's groceries, pay for the next car in line, just give random money to someone if they need it. Um, say encouraging stuff on Facebook, whatever. But also, if you know that one person that needs it, target them, encourage them, help them, love them. You never know what difference it can make. As the worship team comes up, we're going to do one last little exercise here to end as our illustration. We're going to turn the lights off, completely off. We're going to close the blinds. It's going to be pretty dark in here. And that darkness represents the darkness that they were experiencing in that time frame and what people could even be experiencing today. And I want you to take out your phone. Everybody take out your phone. And I want just one person. Do you have your phone, Randy? Okay. Don't turn the lights off. Don't turn the flashlight on yet, Randy. All right. I want Randy to turn on his light. Now, see, if it was an iPhone, he'd already had it up. It would have easily worked. But because it's not an iPhone, he has to go find it. Now, how much light does that one light provide? It would be more if it was an iPhone, but, it doesn't provide a ton of light. And that's kind of the picture of what happens if just one person is light. Now, is that light affecting me? Can I see myself? Can you see me? Yes. But listen, it's not helping me see Mike and Pat there in the back at all. It's not helping me see Jamie. It's not helping me see any of them. That one cashier, he was providing a little light that helped the 4 or 5 of us. But what happens if we all turn our flashlights on, which I want you to do now? It lights up the room. Now I can see Mike looking like a scary something from Halloween or something back there. He looks like a scary Santa or something. But it lights up the room for all us to see. That's what happens when the church is the church. That's what happens when the church is being who God has called the church to be. We light up this dark world in a way that brings other people closer to Jesus. When we all are our lights, we make a difference. But we got to first seek the light, and then we be the light. The worship team talked me into us keeping the lights off and you keeping your lights on your phone for us to sing this last song. They think it would be cool, so we'll try it. So go and stand to your feet, and what we're going to sing, one last song, we're going to sing Living Hope. Because Jesus is our living hope. He is the one that we need to search for. He's the one that we need to go after. So let's pray.